it feels very irresponsible to just do nothing and just let the population kind of deal with it and don't have any like say in it as a force of central control, And so this is very scary, and because this is very scary, and also because like there is an emergency, the population in general is looking to like strong leaders that will do something about it, and you have to do something. And once this ball gets rolling, I think it's very hard to change course.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Chatter. Before we get started, I just have a few quick messages. First off, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. It's the best way that you can help us grow. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a review. It's going to help us rank higher and get more and more views, and therefore bigger and better guests. Don't forget, right now you can pre-order my book, To the Moon, The GameStop Saga. There are still 4 copies that you can get, where you can get your name and the message to the apes put in. Are you trying to quit smoking? Maybe perhaps as part of a smoke-free January, or simply to make yourself healthier in the midst of a pandemic? Well, today's sponsor is Nin Zero Tobacco Nicotine Pouches. Nin is a cutting-edge synthetic nicotine pouch brand that's setting new standards for nicotine pouches in the US, with its lineup of zero tobacco nicotine pouches. Nin Zero Tobacco Nicotine Pouches are the latest innovation in nicotine technology. Made with TFN synthetic nicotine, Nin pouches are available in 2 nicotine strengths, 3 milligrams and 6 milligrams, and 5 signature flavors. That's citrus chill, cinnamon, cool mint, spearmint, and wintergreen. As a truly 100% tobacco-free product, Nin pouches do not contain any tobacco-specific nitrosamines, which are thought to be some of the most potent carcinogens found in tobacco products. Whilst tobacco-derived nicotine often features a strong, pungent odor and taste, synthetic nicotine is virtually tasteless and odorless. On a final note, we must remember that tobacco cultivation, which is commonly very heavily subsidized, can be very damaging to the environment and is often a process that is highly labor-intensive, cumbersome, and wasteful. So these pouches are better for you and better for the environment. Nin pouches are made for adult users and contain tobacco-free nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical. You find links for everything in the description below.
Hello, and welcome to the Ohio Hauntings and Legends podcast. We will be taking you to places you have never dreamt of going. Hundreds, if not thousands, of haunted and abandoned locations. We will visit with the paranormal from your nightmares and try to understand the unexplained. Ohio alone has 88 counties within our state, and virtually each one of those counties has a story to tell. Ohio's history is bloodstained throughout its history. We will be covering more than just Ohio. We will cover the state you live in, the country. Trust me. There are thrills, chills, and we are upping the fright factor with each new stop we make. We will be traveling the world, the globe, looking for the strange, the mysterious, and the frightening. Mostly, we will find the unexplainable. Many of these episodes are genuine. Others are legend or hearsay. Believe those that you choose or believe in none. It is your choice. Just get comfortable, sit back, dim the lights, and listen.
So, okay. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I am joined by Bitcoin and privacy advocate Dare Gigi. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey Josh, thanks for having me.
No problem. So, I've followed you on Twitter for a while, and then realized you were from Austria, which is a country I'm a big fan of. Having, as I mentioned before, we started there, spent the best part of probably 2.5, 3 years of my life there. So it's basically a second home. So it's a little disturbing to watch what's going on right now. But do you want to? I find this a country that people don't really have many thoughts about, or don't really know what to think about it. Does that make sense? So do you want to like give people like a brief history of like Austria, or sort of explain to them what the country is like and the culture and stuff very, very quickly?
Sure. I guess, well, Austria is kind of the small sibling of Germany. So we speak German there as well. And it's sandwiched in between a bunch of countries. So I guess it's in Europe, it's parts of Austria are a heavy transit region and some other parts are heavy tourist regions. So we have some beautiful mountains. It's very good for skiing and those kind of things. So yeah, a lot of GDP in some places is based in tourism. And of course, Austria has a rich history. It used to be a very, very large empire, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And like in Vienna, for example, there was a lot of just, I mean, if you just stroll through Vienna, for example, and also Salzburg and some other places, you can really feel that it has a rich history and a lot of amazing stuff in terms of Western culture happened. So we have a lot of great poets, mathematicians, physicists, and all kinds of Austrian names are well known, and also composers, and like the arts were big when back in the day, so to speak. And today, I guess it's just a small country, and it's also somewhat like a traditional country, I would say. So with still traditional values. And so, for example, there is no large tech sector or anything like that. Like it's not a second Silicon Valley or anything like that. It's with those kind of things, it's mostly like 10 or 20 years behind. And yeah, but still, it's a beautiful place. And so for like if you want to have a nice skiing holiday in Europe, then I would highly recommend it. But of course, currently everything is a little bit different.
Yeah, it is a little different. That's part of why I wanted to get you on. So what would you describe like the political sort of landscape like in Austria before we talk about how it's sort of where it's gone in the last 2 years? Like, how would you have previously described the political atmosphere or that sort of thing like to people?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we have a multi-party system, so it's I would describe it in general as quite conservative in most places except for the cities. So we have like 2 or 3 big cities, and they're the more progressive parties, like the quote unquote green parties. They reign supreme mostly. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's too different from other places in Europe politically, or at least it wasn't. And I'm actually like it took me by surprise that we went so hard in terms of COVID measures, and we're now leading the charge in terms of proposing mandatory vaccinations, for example. So I don't really know where this came from. I have my suspicions, but yeah, it was not. I wouldn't describe it as being out of the ordinary politically, like before COVID hit. It was just a regular small country and regular multi-party system, as it's the usual in those areas in Europe.
Yeah, just a pretty standard sort of Western European state. Is there a big crypto community in Austria?
Not that I know of. I mean,
is it you?
No, there are some Bitcoiners in Austria, but it is a very small country, and we don't have a big like tech sector. And like if you were in Bitcoin in the first 10 years or so, the likelihood that you were in tech as well is very high. Like you know that there was a time where you really had to dig deep and understand the computer science and so on. There were Bitcoin aligns with a lot of political ideals as well. So it is very freedom oriented. And so if you're a liberal in the classical sense and know a bit of monetary history, and especially if you are into sound money, then you might be interested in Bitcoin. But yeah, I mean, again, there are a bunch of people that got into Bitcoin early in Austria. So there's a small community, but it's, I don't know, like it's in the dozens. It's not in the hundreds.
Okay. So, yeah, I guess, yeah, well, I want to move on then to talk about like what's happened in the last 2 years with Austria. I mean, so right now, what is the situation? There's currently a lockdown of the unvaccinated, right? If you're not, you have to use it to get you have to have a pass for having been vaccinated to get into bars, restaurants, basically anything that isn't like an essential service, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't really know when it started, but it was, we started very, very early on with like forcing the population to show papers to get into basically anything. And this wasn't well enforced like in other places, like most bars or restaurants didn't even care too much if you showed like any QR code or any test or what have you. It was fine, like any piece of paper would get you in. And that's what I think a lot of people did, but just like that this was accepted without any hesitation. And of course, over time, the restrictions changed. So in the beginning, we had what was called the 3G rule. So you're either had COVID and are well again, or you just had a test made in the last like 48 hours or something, and the test is negative, or you took the vaccine. Like as soon as the vaccines hit, the rule included the vaccines as well. So this gave you the green light, so to speak, and you could enter those places. And yeah, of course, like it also changed over time because later the app was introduced, and there were some people in some places actually scanning their QR codes and those kind of things. And now in the last couple of months, it got stricter and stricter and kind of more insane, to be honest. And a true kind of segregation started happening. It's like, you're you're either part of this system and you have a valid QR code, or you're basically not a citizen, like, and politicians, I mean, we saw this all over the world, that politicians were basically saying, sometimes out loud and sometimes in between the lines, that if you don't have the valid QR code, if you don't want to play this game, then you're basically not welcome. You're not a citizen, and we're going to make your life hell. And so, as you mentioned before, like the lockdowns for, I mean, we had in some places very early on very strong lockdowns, because in some places they were close to Italy, for example. And yeah, now I think we were one of the first countries, or even the first country, that introduced the lockdown for the unvaccinated. And that's when I got really uneasy, because just the political rhetoric, it went into overdrive, and also the anger of the population in both camps also went into overdrive. So it doesn't matter if you're in the vaccinated camp or in the unvaccinated camp, everyone was just super angry. And of course, those who were still playing by the rules and participating in the QR code system, so to speak, they finally had someone to blame, and they finally had the stubborn unvaccinated population to blame. And so I didn't feel comfortable staying in Austria any longer. And so me and my family, we left that was like end of November, I think. And so I can't even report how the situation is on the ground now, since I've been gone for 1.5 months or so. And but what I hear from family and friends that are still there, it's still very similar. It's not, I think it's not as chaotic and drastic. Like, I mean, it's hard to tell. Again, I left for a reason, but there were a lot of protests. So there was a big push against this segregation, and a big push against mandated vaccinations, because again, like, we were the first country that proposed the law to to either you're getting the vaccine or we're going to put you in jail. That was basically the first proposal. And I think now it's down to a fine. But of course, like, it depends on how deep you want to dig, because what will happen to you if you just refuse to pay the fine? Like, the law has only one way to deal with people like that. And again, it will just take longer for you to land in jail. So that's basically it.
Is the support for these measures like across the board in terms of the political parties, at least apart from the FPO? I know have been sort of quite vocally against this all, but are the rest of them sort of just on board and fine with all this? Like, has there been any opposition from any of the other parties as to like how far this is going?
There isn't. If there is one, there isn't a strong opposition. I think what you just mentioned is correct as far as I can tell, and I reduce my exposure to the politics of it all to a minimum. So I'm not absolutely completely up to date. But yeah, the Freedom Party is the only party that was very outspoken against it. But this is almost meaningless in my estimation because and it's not because it's a small party. It's just that the mainstream narrative is very left to center, and the Freedom Party is described by the mainstream media and by the rest of the political parties as basically you would say an alt-right Nazi party, basically. So whatever they say, you can immediately dismiss. And so they don't have a lot of, since they're so far outside of the overturn window in Austria, it doesn't help to shape the narrative. Like you just can't dismiss whatever those politicians say outright because, they're just basically crazy Nazis. That's how they are portrayed in most of the mainstream media, I would say.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, in some cases they're right, and in some they're just brushing it off. It's quite frustrating that they're able to sort of just tar them with this one brush, But anyway, the thing that really concerns me, I guess, about where this has all sort of ended up is that like all the other countries that have sort of like Austria is just the first one with the passes. So they started, like you said, with you had to take a test to get into lots of places. That was like February, I think, of last year.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, as far as I remember, because I was there at that point. I got asked to go out to work, and before I left, they told me, we're going to open, but there's going to be restrictions, but you have a job. And I got there, and they immediately decided that it was just like super hard lockdown, and I was like, thanks, guys. But yes, and then when you started to need a test for everything, I was just like, I'm not sticking around for this, because nothing was open still at that point. There was no bars or restaurants. I still didn't have a job. I was just podcasting. But yeah, the thing that concerns me is that like Austria has now, they brought in the lockdown for the unvaccinated, but they never said that was going to be the case. They started with you can take a test and everything, and then slowly they kind of just like stripped it back piece by piece. And the same thing is happening in Italy, and I'm just concerned that that's where it goes anywhere it gets introduced. And I guess my question then becomes like, what is the reason for needing the app? Like, what is the motivation for this in your estimation?
It depends on how cynical you want to be.
Start. Maybe give me the most and the least cynical options.
Well, I think the least cynical option is that there is just because the whole situation is so insanely politicized and some people just voice their opinion, they have to stick with it, and they just have to basically do something. Like it's okay, we still have this problem, it's a pandemic, we just can't, like it feels very irresponsible to just do nothing and just let the population kind of deal with it and don't have any like say in it as a force of central control, and so this is very scary, and because this is very scary, and also because like there is an emergency, the population in general is looking to like strong leaders that will do something about it, and you have to do something. And once this ball gets rolling, I think it's very hard to change course and just step back and say, okay, we're not doing the app now. It's like, for example, let's say we stop testing, and those kind of things, and or like with masks, for example, like that's a pet peeve of mine, because I still remember when the main narrative was that no one should wear a mask because masks should be reserved for healthcare workers. And if you, as a dumb citizen, try to put on a mask, the chance is very high that you infect yourself because you don't know what you're doing, and you might hit your eye or your nose or what have you, and you're wearing it incorrectly. And of course, the reason for all that was that there was a massive mask shortage and people were hoarding masks and buying masks. And so they started lying straight away, about the reasons kind of. And ever since, the narrative is flip-flopping in terms of do masks work or not. Like in the US, we hear now, for example, that, no one ever said that cloth masks do any good. Like they never worked, we've always been at war with Eurasia, 1984, that's very scary that this just can't happen, and people will say something like that outright.
Yeah.
And so I think
doesn't believe us, by the way, that was literally a segment. I'm just making a note to put this in the description, so it will be there for anyone that wants to check this out.
No, I'm not making stuff up on the spot. Like all of this actually happened.
Yeah, but I mean, there's the problem is, and I find this is that like there's so much here in this area that it can be so easy to miss so many different things, and like people's opinions can be formed. Like, oh, well, they are formed based on what they see. And because there's so many people saying so many different things on so many different outlets, and there's just so much going on, I find that you have to like give people as much benefit of the doubt as possible, that they are just making the best assumption of what's happening based on what they're getting. Do you know what I mean? So I try to like make sure that I'm saying, look, this is just what I'm seeing. Here is this thing. This is what I thought of it. And I find that to be like the best way to approach this entire topic, because it's so fraught with people like just saying things to each other. It's like, oh, did you see this? Well, what about this? It becomes like a slinging of anecdotes. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but yes, they did say that on CNN. So, description below, people check it out.
Yeah, and that's part of the frustrating thing, that just most people, I think, just can't be bothered or won't be bothered and just want to be left alone. And so they just go along with whatever is being said, and they just comply with whatever rules are put in place. And I think I missed this in the introduction and characterization of Austria. I think, Austrians are just very compliant. They're not rebellious. And I think that's also why it went this far, like if you look at, I don't know, Texas, for example, like that's the chance is lower that politicians would just out in the open talk about vaccination mandates and actually make it pass, like it's you would probably have a revolt earlier than that. And so coming back to the least cynical view of this all, I think there was just a lot of momentum. And once you start doing something, it's very hard to course correct and switch to doing nothing or doing less, because it's like nothing we did worked. Like that's basically almost worldwide. It's very hard. It's very hard to say that outright, because we don't like we literally have no control group. Basically, like there are very, very few places that did things very, very differently. I mean, there are some, and you can look at that and you can draw your own conclusions. I mean, Sweden would be the go-to place in Europe, and so but still, like everyone almost did the same thing, and it's very hard then to step back and say, okay, everything we did not work, so we're not doing anything. It's way easier to say, okay, whatever we did, it didn't work, so we must do something even more drastic. We must lock down harder. We must, hand out even more vaccines, what have you. Like we must double mask. We must introduce new rules and regulations. We just have to be stricter about it all. And as you said before, it was like step by step, and that's just how freedom dies always. It's just millimeter by millimeter. It's, I mean, that's it doesn't matter at what like period in history you look back when it when things got really, really bad. It was always step by step and step by step and step by step. And sometimes there are some outrages along the way. And then, it's like 3 steps back. But again, like we were already so far into this, even if we go 3 steps back now, we are still living in a tyrannical environment, basically. And I think now that the system is basically in place, like the QR code system, and just everyone is used to showing the papers and so on, I think I would be surprised if it would go away very, very soon. And this brings me to the most cynical view of the whole situation. And this, I'm not saying this lightly. I'm not conspiratorial minded. Some people that will scroll through my Twitter timeline might disagree with that, but I'm mostly shit posting on Twitter, so don't take everything I post on Twitter too seriously. But it's I have reasons to say the things that I say because I worked in the digital identity space for a long time, and I helped build out automated systems that deal with passports and identity. And so what is currently happening, this was planned, like what is currently playing out in terms of like showing your papers and QR codes and also biometrics in the passports and all of that. Very powerful people wanted to do something like that for like 20 years, and that if you watch what changed in the airports, for example, in the last 10 years alone. Now you have airport systems where you don't even have to show your passport anymore. You have those e-gates where you just walk up and they scan your face and the gate opens magically and you're back home and you don't have to do anything because you're not on a terrorist watch list and, you're in the clear, your passport is in the clear. And these systems are getting rolled out all over the place, and you also see it sometimes in hotels and like there are some test beds of these systems. Let's put it like that, Mm-hmm. And also, this is something you can look up and read up. And like the European Union, for example, is very outspoken about this, about building a European identity system that goes across all nations and where you have just one European ID card. And this links to everything, it links to, it's not that you, like currently with separate systems for these kind of things, like for your healthcare, for example, you have your healthcare card and you have a driver's license and your identity system and you have your bank card and your bank account and so on. And none of it is linked in some places a little bit, but no one has all the power, no one can just deplatform you from life. They can freeze your bank account, or you can lose your credit rating, or depending on the situation, you might lose your access to healthcare or what have you. But they can't do what they can do currently in China. And in China, they have this totalitarian social credit score system where just everything is controlled by the party. And if you are a good citizen, then you will get a loan, you will get healthcare, you can buy plane tickets and train tickets, and you can book a hotel room and so on. And if you're not a good citizen, that means you you cross the street when the light is red, or you say something wrong on a Chinese chat app about the political party, then again, you will be deplatformed from life. Then you won't get a loan, you won't get healthcare, you cannot book a train ticket and so on. And so, I think some people would benefit from such a totalitarian system, and this is one step in that direction. And so I think it is one, one should think of the possibility that this is being built in front of our noses. And that's what's way more scary to me than any biological virus that is currently circulating.
Mm. So yeah, I was just getting up on screen there while you were talking the European Federated ID system sort of proposals there. So yeah, it says that they aim to serve 500 million people. So this is definitely something that has been proposed. So this was November 2018. This paper was proposed, but I know you're accurate in saying that this has been something, the European wide identity system has been something they've been actively trying to get through, but it's obviously been I have one example why I can say this with confidence. Again, I'm cheating a bit because I'm an industry insider, But for example, we now have very strict requirements how your passport picture has to look like, like no sunglasses, no hat,
facing the camera, very well lit, and so on. And this is just to make it easier for the algorithms. This is to make it compatible always with facial recognition, so that you can automate that. And there's also a reason, like if you look at your passport right now, if you got your passport in the last like 10 years or so, maybe it's a bit longer, you have a small NFC chip symbol on the front of it, and your passport will contain an NFC chip, and all the data of your passport, including your biometrics, is stored there. And if you don't believe me, just download I think it's called Read NFC or something, or Read IDs, I think is what it's called, on Android. I'm sure there are iOS apps as well. And you can scan the NFC chip of your passport with your mobile phone if it has an NFC chip, and you can read out some of the information from your passport very easily. And you can't access all of it because some of your biometrics and some other things are hidden away, but it's all there, and it's all like this is what has been in the works for like 15 years plus. And there are some other things that play into this as well. But I think that's enough to show that this is not a crazy conspiracy theory or anything. Like that's actually what is being built in front of our noses. You just have to pay attention.
Yeah, and I mean, like the idea of having like European-wide identity card that you can use is, I don't know, that doesn't seem so crazy to me. Right, it's the part like that seems like it's totally fine. No, to me, it's like this is a card that you can use throughout Europe if you want. Awesome, it will be useful for travel. Like I or even if it's say linked to your insurance details, or I don't know. I don't see the problem with this sort of vaguely integrated system. The problem is when there's not like walls built around that information, and there is no limits to how integrated that system can come with your life. And then on top of that, where it mandates some sort of like medical procedure, but not just that, it's like it's mandating your compliance with the system in order to access things, and needing that to actually, that's the only physical way to access things. That's where it becomes a requirement for life, is the part where it's really dangerous. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I think we are already, like on this very dark and dangerous path. It's just that we accepted that we need, a passport and an identity card in the first place. Like passports were like, they didn't always exist. And if you study history, even in times where things were extremely good, like in the Belle Epoque, this was pre-passports. And that's like, if the Renaissance, we didn't have passports, we had free travel without passports. It was enough to say who you are, to identify yourself, and passports, for example, were supposed to be a temporary measure, and were introduced after World War I, basically, and so we're just, there's this this saying that nothing is as permanent as a temporary government measure. And so like that's just what keeps happening, and now, for example, we had 9/11, and now airports are just hell, like going through airport security, no matter where you are, or except when you're flying with a private jet, it doesn't matter who you are. And it's just, it doesn't have to be this way. I don't think we are more safe from terrorist attacks because of the security theater at the airports. And now we just, like we have this support, like, again, it's about quote unquote security, like we have to know who you are at all times, and we have to make sure to surveil all your movements and all your financial transactions. I mean, now it's even proposed that everything, if you spend more than $600, then you're already suspicious. Like that's what's actually being proposed, and you're laughing, because it's hilarious.
It is hilarious. It's like, oh, you can track all our transactions. You can't stop the money laundering and the the offshoring of huge amounts of money. Like, you can't stop that, but you can monitor all our bank accounts. Okay.
and so I think you're right that currently, if it doesn't target you, then it doesn't seem that like suspicious or strange and so on. But I encourage all of your listeners to just check out what's going on in China, and then you can see where this inevitably leads. And I say inevitably because if there is someone who is in charge and who can deplatform you or just remove you from life, or just can freeze your accounts and so on. This will inevitably happen, and we see this even in online discourse. If you look what happens on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, and so on, like it's just the political climate changes a little bit in those companies, and suddenly you're getting completely wiped off the face of the platform for saying the wrong thing, showing the wrong image, having the wrong song in the background, like having the wrong guest on even, like it's that's where we are at. And that's where I think we are also heading into, just in real life, so to speak, if you wanted to put it in those terms.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure the extent to which the general public agrees with this censorship, but then I don't know, sometimes I say things about people being removed from Twitter, and I'm like, look, does this person not these companies sold this thing where they were going to be the town square of the internet, and then they sort of rug pulled all the freedom away from it and they apply the rules based on their own political ideology, and they kind of get away with it in many ways. And people are just like, well, if someone gets removed that people don't like, most of the time they're like, well, they had it coming. And it's like, what? What do you mean they had it coming? It's like, oh, well, they're a private company, they can do what they want. And it's like, oh, okay, so now private companies can do what they want. Oh, okay, I see. But I want to
censorship is always fine if it is against someone that I don't agree with, like that's the main lesson to be learned there. And of course, that's such a short sighted view of things, because free speech is exactly about allowing the opinions to be voiced that are reprehensible and that you don't agree with. Otherwise we would not need free speech, and otherwise we would not. I find it so outrageous. For example, with the COVID situation, the most outrageous thing to me is that the overtone window, the window of what is allowed to be discussed, is so insanely small, and it got smaller almost every day, and we've seen this over and over again. You were deplatformed and were called a conspiracy theorist when you voiced what is now called the lab leak theory, that, okay, it came from Wuhan. In Wuhan, there is this strange biolab that works with exactly those viruses. Maybe it leaked there. Okay, that's banned from Twitter for life, and that was 1.5 years ago. And now it's just an accepted thesis, basically. And this happened over and over and over again. And so we see a concerted effort of censorship all across the board, not only in mainstream media, but also on those platforms, and also in society. If you, and I know personally, because I, for one reason or another, I was on the forefront of this, because I just think because a lot of Bitcoiners were very early on this stuff. And so I knew more, I would say, than my peers in meat space. And whenever I shared these kind of theories, I was immediately cancelled in real life. No one would take me seriously or talk to me. People look at you funny and you're immediately kind of a crazy person or what have you. And so this is very concerning, because this is always this is never a good situation to be in, to kind of let this happen. And there is this, I was just reminded when you mentioned this, of this old poem, or this old rhyme. First they came for the communists and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. And then they came for the unionists and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a unionist. And then they came for the Jews and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me and there was no one left to speak out for me. That's exactly what's currently happening. And funnily enough, with COVID, for example, we see it now that everyone ignored the kind of crazy people that refuse to take the vaccine for whatever reason, oh, you're anti-vaxxers and you're anti-science and so on. And now, now 6 months later, or however long it is, or 8 months later, it's okay, you only have one jab, you're unvaccinated, you're in the bad camp now, and in some places it's even now, okay, you're double jabbed, you're not boosted, you're in the bad camp now. And so the same thing that played out in history is playing out again. And that's that really gives me pause, because it's very interesting that we have to, it seems like we as a society have to learn these very hard lessons over and over again.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of reminds me of something that Brett Weinstein had said in a podcast with Jordan Peterson a while ago. Got to be at least 6 or 7 years old, and he said that there are these like latent things in our genetic code or in our the way our minds function that sort of leads us down these roads to othering people and then proceeding to do increasingly awful things to them. And there are thankfully examples in which that's not been we haven't ended up at the darkest road in every case, and in quite a lot of cases it's gone the other way. Over the past 50 years, like people who would have been, a lot of our attitudes to people have liberalized, and that sort of idea that everyone's equal, we're all just people, is, I don't know, I that no one's better than anyone else. That seems like the accepted sort of accepted feeling of like 99% of the world.
At least it was one. At least it was 1.5 years ago or so.
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I hope that at some point I hope that there is so many different levels of being vaccinated or unvaccinated, and there's so many different classifications of it that it just becomes impossible to tell who is, what, and therefore it sort of just fades into obscurity. Do you know what I mean? I hope that the complexity of it all adds up to a point where no one cares anymore.
I mean, this happened before, and it sometimes happens with assigning group identities to people, and then these groups splinter and splinter and splinter, and then you're back to the individual again, and then you have to kind of figure out, okay, every person is a person, for itself. And that's also like why, we have this nice German saying, like it's like the first right in the grand constitution, so to speak. It's similar to the First Amendment. Basically, it's like die Würde des Menschen ist unantastbar, which means that every, like, your worth must not be touched. It basically says you're holy and you have a soul, like that's the main idea. Like it doesn't matter if you did something horrible. It doesn't matter if you have a horrible disease. It doesn't matter what you did in the past. Like it doesn't matter if you're a murderer and so on. You still have dignity. You still have some dignity, and we have to treat people with dignity. And so I think we have these ideas and these also this idea of human rights and it is because of the lessons we learned in the past, because as you said, there are certain circumstances where it's very, very easy to vilify and dehumanize people. And once you dehumanize people, that's when really bad things happen. And we see this over and over again, and that's why I was very, like that. Once that started happening in Austria, I was like, okay, we're leaving, like once the kind of the, and I'm not saying that there are evil people on top that orchestrate this, like it is more like it might be both things, but there is also, there's at a certain point, it's like it's very hard to tell when a mob turns violent, for example, in a crowd, at a concert or what have you. And so there were certain things said where it's like, like those are the filthy rats and so on. And those are like the carriers of disease. And once you start speaking in those terms, it's like, if you can leave, I would say it's time to leave because you don't know where this is going, like it's from this to genocide, it might be only like, half a year or a year. And like it's crazy to say this out loud, but just study history. Just study history is all I'm saying. It has happened in the past, and human psychology hasn't changed in any meaningful way. Doesn't matter how far back you go in history, all atrocities are the same in some sense.
I mean, the one thing that I do, that's like obviously one road we could venture down, but I hope that, as you say, we have like human rights and all these things written into constitutions that were never really present in the past when these sorts of atrocities have taken place. And I kind of hope that they do like genuinely act as a buffer in a way, in that there is still within the system a legal way to challenge this sort of discrimination against people. And I know it's not been like particularly, every time I see these things go to court, they lose, but they don't seem to get to court very often, basically. So I've seen it happen in America, like Biden's vaccine mandates for companies and for federal employees has been struck down. I saw the vaccine pass and QR code app thing was declared, I think it was unconstitutional in Belgium. I keep seeing these things defeated in court whenever they get really up to the wire, and like it's like, okay, right, you can't use Twitter to shift and like carve a narrative, and you can't just deplatform someone. It's like you're in a courtroom, and you have these like 70, 80, 90-year-old legal precedents that you can rely upon, and that's honestly where I hope that we end up. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I hope so too, and that's a very fine, optimistic take. It's just that, like, if you are in a precarious situation and you like these processes take a long time to play out. Like the courts, they don't act very swiftly, to put it nicely, and so it will take a while for all of this to play out, and so I think there are certain situations and certain windows of time where things just go completely haywire. And of course, I believe in those institutions in the long run. I think there will be justice in the long run, at least, like some justice. And like I'm saying that because, like a lot of people believe in cosmic karma and so on. And I do to some extent as well, but the world is also a very big and nasty and unfair place. And a lot of people get away with stuff, so there's just that as well. But I trust in the court system in that regard as well. I just to put another spin on this, and that's it plays in the like it's in between the least cynical and the most cynical scenario, and it is just impossible to make sense of the world currently, and this was also somewhat inevitable because the internet is what it is, and it splinters narratives, so to speak. It's like everyone has a megaphone now, and the corporate media is completely losing control and has been for a very long time. And this was predicted by, like in part by just network people and computer scientists a long while ago. A lot of people talked about this phenomenon and how it is a more chaotic system because it is a network system, and network effects are always exponential. And so also, for example, things that are network, they can oscillate. Like if you find the right frequency, like in some sense, a static structure like a bridge is also a network. It's like a network of forces. And if you find the right frequency, the bridge can oscillate in a way that it destroys itself, and that you have wild swings in the bridge. Like if you have never seen videos where the wind blows into granted old bridges, but they are like steel and cement bridges, but they will, like they will be like Play-Doh in the wind. And that's a characteristic of just chaotic, highly connected networks. You don't have this in like to pick another example, a very strict structure in a corporation. Like if you have an old school steel corporation, or like Coca-Cola as it was like 50 years ago, so you don't have a phenomenon like this. But if you have something like YouTube or Facebook or Twitter that is highly networked, or the internet in general, then you will have these phenomena where, we see this all the time. That's why things go viral. That's why, narratives change on a dime. That's why also, some people just move to different platforms in a flash, and also new platforms pop up from nowhere, and there are suddenly 1 billion people on that. I know where TikTok was still called Musical.ly, or what it was called, but it took this platform, I don't know how many users they have, it's probably 1 billion plus, but it didn't take them decades. so we live in a very different and strange world nowadays, and it's just that like you said in the beginning, like everyone is saying different things. And I think that's also a very Petersonian view of the world, that he often mentions that there are just too many data points in the world. There's too much information. So the main the main thing that your brain does so that it can make sense of the world is block out everything that is currently not meaningful, and just on a worldwide basis, this is currently not really possible. Everyone is flooded with information all the time, and we have no meaningful mechanisms to make sense of the world currently. I mean,
we've no sense of what is like what a metric is for what is meaningful, because everything could be a useful nugget.
Exactly. And that's also something like I view the internet or let's say social media currently, I mean, it was true in some sense before social media existed as well, but it was more in the 24-hour news cycle and so on. But it's like social media currently is acting like the nervous system of your body, and it's like it errs on the side of overreaction massively. It's like you stub your little toe on the nightstand. It's if it's like 2 a.m. you just woke up to take a piss, it's like the end of the world for you. It's like you stub your toe and it feels like you broke your whole foot or what have you, and it feels like everything is going to shit right now, but it's nothing. And that's basically, like that's social media for you in a nutshell. It doesn't matter what happens. It's like overreaction. It's like that's what the nervous system does. It has to scream fire, fire, fire. And if you have a small splinter below your nail, it feels like you're going to die, but you're not actually dying. If you have something in your eye, it feels like you're going blind forever, but that's actually not what's happening. And so I think that plays a large role in that. And of course, like you as a human being, like your frontal cortex knows that this is actually not the end of the world, and you will, march on, hobble a little bit for 5 minutes, take your piss and go back to sleep. And we as a collective have not figured out what to do with this new kind of nervous system that we have, like I think we cannot ignore it, and it's too addictive and it's too much. And I think that's also why a lot of tech people, like all the executives at Facebook, they don't have a Facebook account. Basically, all the executives at Apple, they don't have an iPhone, and they like the first time their daughters or their sons will get an iPhone is when they're like 18, like, what I'm trying to say? Yeah. They are so close to all of this. They know that this is very dangerous and weird technology, so to speak, and we just haven't figured out how to deal with it yet.
I bet the Twitter executives are all on Twitter, though. That just, I don't know.
The old one was.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, well, maybe not. I mean, maybe they're just lurkers. Maybe they're not tweeting. But so I kind of I wanted to go back a little bit then to this idea of the inevitability of this sort of system creating itself and sort of continually going further and further and further and further. Basically, was I think your point you were saying. And if there's a government with the ability to exploit that sort of power to be able to block people from society based on some arbitrary metric that they decide, that they will take that opportunity. And it's definitely something that I've been saying to people. I'm like, look, this is too much power for one person to have, especially when you consider how corrupt I think everyone realizes the British government is. Like, we're on special levels of like handing out outrageous amounts of money to the donors and friends of the highest members of our government, and everyone just being like, all right, no problem. I mean, I have no idea how this happened, but anyway, so I kind of curious as to like, is that inevitable? Is that the inevitable end of it? Like, does it have to go there? Because I don't know, I definitely feel like there's a way for us to have some of the integration and the ability to have some sort of digital ID or something but without the necessary requirement for it to be needed for access to life, and that people could just like get involved with it if they want, but there was no obligation for it. I don't know. It feels like it feels like we're being forced to make a binary choice basically, and it's like, well, this is it. So, and I'm curious as to whether like the aspect of privacy could play a role in this, in giving people back the ability to say, this is how much I want the government or society to know about me. Everyone have the ability to sort of shutter their data.
Yeah, it's such a big and difficult question, because it's there's so much wrapped up in it. I think you have to do something like a system analysis, in the sense that how does the system actually work, and what are the incentives of the system, and who actually benefits and who is in power. And I think, there's a lot to be learned from these old wise sayings. It's like, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if you study history, you see this over and over and over again. There are people with great intentions and great promises, and then they rise to power, and then, like, it's just those are very exceptional people that can handle power. Like, it's power actually does corrupt, and we see this all the time in scales.
Reading a book about it.
There you go.
I'm going to be interviewing this guy at the end of the year.
What's the full title?
It's called Corruptible: Who Gets Power and How It Changes Us. So it's literally addressing your question. Like, does power change us? And the answer was yes, some of the time. Sometimes it's the bad people who end up in power. Sometimes the bad people end up in power and then get made worse by power, or more efficient at carrying out whatever they want. So it sort of walks through like that. This is both like kind of true and a myth. But it made me have a lot more sympathy for a lot of the politicians in this fight. Seriously, it made me think that they're probably not awful people. Do you know? It's very
they're all humans after all. Or at least have a human form.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
I mean, there's some of them that I just think are completely just. I think there's some of them are just lost sight of whatever good that they were trying to do in the world. Like people like Fauci. I don't know, man. He's gone, but I mean, I think it's very similar to once you start doing something, then you have to keep doing that thing. And it's like, once you play a certain character in public, you have to stick to your character. And it's like, it takes a life of its own, like he's definitely possessed by the whatever character he plays, like the doctor of the world. And I mean, he's saying stuff like, he is representing science, like he's the face of science currently. And like, those are completely outrageous things to say. And what if you actually translate what he's saying, it's like saying, I am the face of truth, and whatever because people equate science with what is actually true. It's the way to find out what is true and what is not. And so yeah, I think again, it's just, there's again, to your point, everyone is human, including Fauci, and I don't know what I would do or how I would react or what I would say in his shoes. I think it's an impossible question. You will only know if you are in that position. Like, there is no other way to know. And just again, historically, there was like there were one or two great leaders that gave away their power, and they're far and few between, like they're as exceptional as the religious figures we still talk about, like that's like those people basically don't exist. Mm-hmm. And so as far as I'm concerned, building systems that have those power structures embedded in them is very dangerous. And we see this all the time. I mean, like, just take Google, two very well-meaning computer scientists build a nice algorithm and so on. And for the first, I don't know, decade or maybe 2 decades, the tagline was "Don't be evil." It's just like, we are just indexing the knowledge of the world, and we want to build an amazing knowledge engine, and we want to make everything accessible and so on. And they had to remove the fucking tagline, because it's not possible to not be evil once you are a like $1 trillion corporation, like it's just absolutely impossible. You suddenly have to, build drone autopilots for the Department of Defense or what have you, like, no, but seriously, like those are the research projects that Google is involved in part, and of course, like now it's an Alphabet umbrella corporation. It's like you can't even count the subsidiaries anymore. So they're doing all kinds of things. And of course I mean, I think it's actually great that they removed it, because like it's at least somewhat honest, and so I think the systems that we sketched out before with the European identity system and so on, and if you just look what the official proposals and so on are saying, these are systems that put certain entities in control. And I don't care who is part of these entities. I don't care who is the president of the European Union and so on. The fact that these levers of control exist,
automatically make these systems very problematic, like borderline evil, because there will always be one marginalized group that we don't like for one reason or another, whether it's political or religious or what have you, and they will just be completely deplatformed from society. That's what you do with those people, and we can see this again, like I know I repeat myself, but we can see this very clearly in China, and there are all kinds of reasons why people are getting deplatformed from life there. And so it is very problematic, but I'm not, I'm not a Luddite. I'm not against technology. I'm also not against those kind of systems necessarily. I mean, for God's sakes, I'm a Bitcoiner. I'm into funny internet money, and and I'm a technologist at heart, and I think there is something to be said for powerful systems, but they must not have the central point of control and or failure. And for example, we see this now in chat applications and those kind of things. If something is end-to-end encrypted, that's in general better for the population than for the rulers. Like if you can speak privately and you have certain cryptographic assurances that no one can snoop on you, no matter who they are, not even the company that is running the service, then that's a good thing in my estimation. And Bitcoin is very similar. Like everyone can use it and no one can freeze your account. You can always use it. Bitcoin will always be there for you, and it's your money that you control. But of course, like there comes a lot of responsibility with those kind of systems as well. Like you cannot call a hotline in case you messed up, for example. And, like that's, they're always, I really like this saying, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And so, for example, we zeroed in on some things that in the Western world we consider of highest importance. And one of those is free speech, for example, and freedom of expression and all of it. But free speech is, what I'm trying to say is free speech is dangerous as well. As is encrypted end-to-end encryption, like encrypted messaging, and as is Bitcoin. Like with Bitcoin, you can actually buy drugs online. You can also buy weapons online. You can also hire a hitman and so on. Like this, the narrative that was prevalent like 10 years ago, it's only for criminals and dark net money. This is true, but you can also use free speech to write manifestos, and to disseminate hate speech and to incite violence in other people and give people really bad ideas. Like you can write the Communist Manifesto and publish it. Like we have to take those risks that the solution to free speech is not censorship. The solution is more free speech. It's more discussion and more good ideas and so on and so forth. And so I'm a fan of those kind of decentralized organic systems that sort themselves out over time. And I think that's also what we build up in the West, like in the US, for example, we have this more or less free system, and we have some checks and balances in place that balance the power out. Like that was the big idea, like there's not one entity that has all the power. And so I think we can build such systems. It's even more difficult in the technosphere, like in the political sphere, it's already very difficult. I think in the technosphere, it's even more difficult. But I think that's also what a lot of people are currently trying to build, like there are a lot of people. And this is actually what has me very hopeful, like a lot of people realize that we are currently on a very dark path when it comes to Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and all of it. And people are trying to build systems where free speech still reigns supreme and where some certain ideals are like you have a guarantee that these ideals are upheld and not only just a promise. And that's a big difference.
Yeah. And actually, you reminded me there of when you were talking about that, you just made me think of the mass formation psychosis thing that Peter McCulloch and Dr. Robert Malone brought up on Joe Rogan's podcast. And when you were talking about the dangers of free speech, basically. And when they were talking about the mass formation psychosis, about how, it's a time of uncertainty and everything seems chaotic and there's all these problems but no one has any idea to what's right and what's wrong and what's truth, and someone comes along and says, hey, I've got all the answers, I'll fix it for you. Like, it reminded me just as much of how Trump came to power, because he didn't end up being dangerous, but he could have been, and so, but it's like, I genuinely think that a lot of the Trump supporters were the same. Like there was a lot of merits to Trump's campaign, the stick it to the establishment sort of side of things, to the fact that he wasn't what they were, but there was a lot of bad things about him, and he didn't really do, like, he had the opportunity to do something about these tech companies, He's 4 years in there. He could have done something. And he didn't, he tweeted and
well,
he like the libs, it didn't, he didn't do anything. But the people, like a lot of his supporters are sort of still thinking that he's the Messiah. And that screams to me of the same effect that we've seen about, the vaccines or Fauci or whoever it is coming to save you from the World Health Organization. I've seen the same thing, which again is like speech is dangerous. The people were speaking to turn people against one another in all of these other times in history, but the way that it was defeated was by people saying nicer things.
But that's the whole point, right? If speech wouldn't be dangerous, we wouldn't need to build our whole civilization around this one axiom: don't mess with free speech. Like if it would be benign, we would not need free speech laws and the First Amendment and so on and so forth. Like it's like, or in the Christian tradition, the Logos. Like we figured this out like 2,000 years plus ago. That you do not mess with free speech. Once you start doing this, everything goes to hell. And so that like if something is benign, you do not even need to mention it. And so I think that is really telling that we put this emphasis on free speech. It is because free speech is dangerous, but we have to accept this danger because the alternative is worse. And in terms of Trump, I think it's interesting that not much has changed during Trump, but it's also interesting that not much has changed during Obama, like in the grand scheme of things. So in the end, I think you can see this as a good thing in the sense that, no matter how well-behaved or crazy a person is, depending, on your political affiliation, you can flip those labels around. I don't care. It is like, if you have a big ship, like the US is a very big ship, and it might be smart to, even if you have a president and one who is at the wheel, so to speak, that he can't do much. Like the system has so much inertia that it kind of regulates itself somewhat. Of course, there's also the cynical answer of kind of the quote unquote deep state, and that the president doesn't have any real power anyway. I don't believe that this is true, because the president definitely has some real power. Trump did some things, and Obama also did some things, and so on. But I think in the US it's especially interesting because in the UK, like there's this element of the president, the puppet that we show to the world, and in the UK I think this is better taken care of because you have the royal family and you have the actual politicians, so to speak, and in the US it's all mushed together in the like the presidential family acts like the royal family as well, like if you look at how the first lady is reported about and all that jazz. So but what I wanted to say about Trump in particular is that for me, one of the most concerning phases during Trump's presidency was when he was banned from Twitter, because he was a sitting US president and he was banned from Twitter, which was his main outlet, his main communication platform to the world, And this really tells you, and there was no backlash for Twitter in any meaningful way, like there was some outrage, but that was it. And that really tells you something, that tells you how powerful these platforms are and how immune they are as well. Like that's, if you can do that, if you can deplatform the sitting president of the free world, then you can deplatform absolutely everyone. It doesn't matter, And so that's something to remember. Think of Trump what you will, but that is really scary. And I say this as a Twitter addict somewhat. Like I still like the platform and I think it's useful and I think it's one of the better social media platforms out there and so on. But still, this is a development that's not good at all. And now you also mentioned the mass formation psychosis, which I think I heard. I think it was Matthias Desmet who first mentioned the term. Who spoke
again, I believe.
Yeah, who like if you don't know what we're talking about, I encourage you to check out any video, like any interview with Matthias Desmet. I think he did 2 or 3 or 4, and he mentions the same things always, so it doesn't matter which one you watch, I think. But it's such it helped me a lot because it puts a framework around, a psychological framework around what what's happening, and it helps you to understand and also empathize with the people that are kind of, it doesn't matter in what camp they are, because he very specifically mentions those preconditions that you mentioned as well, like this free floating anxiety, and no one can make sense of the world, and everyone is like, half depressed and very frustrated, and all the rest of it. And so there are some people, just like regular hypnosis, there are some people that are very susceptible to this phenomenon, and there are some people that are not very susceptible. And so you always have like this 30% are like religious believers of Lord Fauci. 30% are like, they just don't want to be bothered. They can go out either way. They like are neutral, so to speak. And you have 30% dissidents that are just stubborn enough for, I don't know what it is, that don't play along with the mass formation. And it's very much like a madness of the crowd kind of scenario when viewed through this framework. And it is interesting because he mentions that in all times when really strange things happened, when you look back at this period in history and you ask yourself, like, how could people do this? Basically, like how could everyone go so crazy? It was always these preconditions, and it was basically always this phenomenon, And he also has a very hopeful message that, like, even though this is how authoritarian regimes arise, it's a very unstable situation to be in, and it's like any system. If you have to apply outside force to it to work, it will self-implode over time, and that's why every totalitarian regime fails in the end. But of course, we have some regimes like I still would not wish it into existence, because there are some regimes that survive for decades and longer. So, well, yeah, that's it. But it is a very helpful framework, I would say.
So how does Bitcoin save us all?
You don't know this yet?
Well, I just want your opinion.
Yeah. Oh man, where should I even start? Do we have another hour or two? No, it's like,
take as long as you want, man.
It's where should I even start? It's it depends. It really depends on how much one knows about Bitcoin. Like, the way I would answer this question would depend on how much someone knows about Bitcoin. But from everything that we talked about, the common theme is that you basically have the state that tries to centrally control what is happening in the world and tries to impose its authority upon the population. And what Bitcoin, we say Bitcoin fixes this. I mean, Bitcoiners say Bitcoin fixes absolutely everything. And of course, take this with a grain of salt. But there is the fact that money is one half of every transaction. And unless you do something out of love, or because you're forced to do it with, like a gun to your head, or because you're enslaved, there's only money, and money literally makes the world go around. Like, you either do it out of love, or you have economic incentives to do something. Like, that's the gist of it. And so if the economic incentives are broken, and if the money is broken, a lot of the world is broken. And so when you hear Bitcoiners say outrageous things like Bitcoin fixes this, or Bitcoin fixes literally every problem in the world, it is because of those reasons. Like, a lot of stuff in the world is really, really fucked up. And it is because what we call fiat money, like money that has no relationship to reality anymore, it just doesn't work. And that's why we see, like the 0.01% and the rest of us all that own basically nothing and have to be happy anyway, according to the World Economic Forum. And there's just this super elite of like 26 people that own more than 50% of the wealth of the world. And just everything is like, I mean, for God's sakes, if you look at COVID, for example, you have airlines that are flying flights empty because otherwise they won't get their bailouts and they will get their landing permits removed. You have cruise ships that are standing empty and that would go bankrupt, and everyone is just getting bailed out. It's just like great financial crisis all over again, where just the friends and family of the rich and famous they get all the bailouts, and the plebs can eat the scraps and can just take the antidepressants and watch TV basically. And so my point is that on one hand, Bitcoin fixes a lot of things because it literally fixes the money. Bitcoin is sound money and it is rooted in reality again, just like gold was, but gold, of course, you can't email gold, you can't transport it over a communications channel. You cannot send it online. And this is actually the amazing, the magical thing about Bitcoin, that it behaves like a real thing, and it behaves like a gold coin or cash or what have you. And it has real value, and you can send it through a communications channel, and the fact that no one can meddle with its monetary policy is the most important fact of Bitcoin. That no matter what other people try, that there will be 21 million Bitcoin in existence, and not a single Bitcoin more. And this is very different from the monetary policy that we have in our world, because we have central banks all over the world. We have the European Central Bank and the Fed in the US that control monetary policy for those regions. And they just, as we see with COVID now, the response to COVID, they print billions and even trillions of dollars out of thin air, and it's you have to think about money printing. Like, there is a nice thought experiment where, let's say everyone has $2,000 on their bank account, and then someone snips with their finger and let's double it. Everyone has 4,000 now. What actually changed? Is everyone twice as rich? You really have to think about these things. It's when everything is said and done, was there twice as much value produced in the world? Or is it just the same and just the prices went up by double, because that's what is actually happening. But the trick of the central banks is, of course, that the money that is introduced in the system is not spread out equally. So, it's like you are having a money printer in your basement, and every time there's an emergency and, you crash your car or you need an operation or what have you, you just throw on the money printer and you just have the money, and no one really notices or cares, because it takes a while for the money to circulate and for prices to adjust and so on. So there are very select few people in the world, very high up, like political leaders close to central banks and so on. They do not have to work for money. They can just wish it into existence. And the rest of the population has to do real work to earn money. That's what money represents. And that's why also Bitcoin is so difficult to understand, because you really have to understand money. You really have to understand value. You really have to understand encryption. You really have to understand networks. You really have to understand computer science. You really have to understand game theory and all the rest of it. It's almost impossible to understand for the first couple of years even. You have to study it for years until certain light bulbs go off in your head, and then it's like, oh wow, now this finally makes sense. And so this is what Bitcoin fixes. There is no way to print money. And so in the very long run, all the things that we mentioned in the first hour of this conversation, they're all financed in the end by money printing, because it's not like you're not taxed at a meaningful higher rate just to pay off the 6 trillion that have been printed. It's something like 60% or something like that of all US dollars in circulation were printed in response to the COVID crisis. That's insane. That's absolute insanity. And this is what Bitcoin does away with in the very long run. And I say this with some confidence, because all fiat monies die, the graveyard of fiat currencies, of currencies that are not backed by anything, that are just made up, like the US dollar and the euro and the yen and all the rest of it. They all go away. They all have a lifespan. The average lifespan of fiat currency is like 30 years or something like that. And the US dollar is like
same thing with the totalitarian regimes so far.
Yeah, so far that is true. And there is a dark scenario, like if this Western social credit score system can be established, it will be very hard to get out of it. You will have to wait for the collapse. There can't be any meaningful resistance. So that there is a very dark path where most of humanity will be enslaved forever, basically. It's the end of 1984. It's like, imagine a boot stamping on your face forever. Yeah. But I don't adhere to this vision of the future, because we have Bitcoin, and Bitcoin, the way it works is that no one can tell you to not use Bitcoin. That's the beauty of it, to own Bitcoin means just having 12 words in your head. That's all there is to it, and you literally, it's like, once you understand these kind of things, you realize what's going on here. Like it's they can imprison you for like 30 years and you still have your Bitcoin. Just remember those 12 words, or remember your password, so to speak, and it's such a powerful construct that it's very hard to make someone else see it that did not go through this quasi-religious awakening. It's like I often say, like, can you really understand Buddhism without practicing Buddhism? Like from the outside, you probably cannot understand it. You have to go to a monastery and be a Buddhist for like 10 years, and then maybe you understand Buddhism. Maybe not, like maybe that's not long enough, but I don't know what the Buddha has to say about it. But I can absolutely guarantee you there's no way to understand Bitcoin without using Bitcoin, without getting really close to it, without using it for a long while, without having meaningful money in it, without, like losing your wallet and recovering it again, without running your own node, without knowing what consensus parameters are important to you, what consensus rules you run, and those kind of things, and if this all sounds gibberish to you, that's perfectly normal, like that's how it is. that's how it is if a religious fanatic talks, like that's it only makes sense once you really dig down into it and kind of experience it for yourself, because otherwise you just have to believe what I say is true, but I encourage everyone to just look at Bitcoin with an open mind, and also ignore everything else. Like literally everything else is basically a scam, so you will lose your money.
Wait,
and
hang on a second. Dogecoin is a scam.
It's a funny scam, but it's still a scam.
I actually think that's probably one of the least scammy, because the two creators have left. They're not involved with the project anymore. So actually, but it's just, it has meme value, and that is uncorruptible.
Yeah, but Elon Musk's plan of making Dogecoin the world reserve currency will not play out, and there are very good reasons for that. There is, for example, a reason why gold became the monetary standard of the world and not tungsten or bronze or what have you. That there are like monetary realities that are very important, and in Bitcoin, this is hash rate, network security, those kind of things, and so yeah. Well, again, a word of caution. I will repeat it. Only look at Bitcoin, stick to Bitcoin. If you have to dabble in everything else, you've been warned. Feel free to get wrecked. Feel free to burn your hand on the oven and so on. But everyone who has been around for a long while will tell you the same thing. It's just like, there's Bitcoin and there's shitcoin. That's just the way it is. And and that's I didn't make this up. This is part of the US congressional record. So I think Senator Sherman said that there is Bitcoin and there is shitcoin. So there you have it. It it left the Bitcoin space and is now well known in the world, so to speak. And so in the very long run, to come back to answering the question of how Bitcoin fixes this, Bitcoin makes the individual sovereign again. You are in control of your money, and money is very important in those regards, because the end of those social credit score systems is basically steering people into behaviors because of monetary and other incentives. And so if you have fuck you money, if you're a billionaire currently, like those rules do not apply for you, like you hop into your private jet and go somewhere else and do whatever, like the very different rules apply. And you can definitely buy a certain amount of freedom for some time, depending on how things shake out, like if the global new world order does indeed come, then, there will be an end to that as well. But I remain very hopeful. And secondly, the maybe more important part in the long run is that Bitcoin demonetizes the state. And if the Bitcoin thesis remains to be true...
Is that your own quote? Or did you steal that from someone? Bitcoin
I don't know.
That's the state. That is just absolutely stunning.
No, but it absolutely does. I mean, that's very well known in the Bitcoin space. I don't claim any originality in everything I say here. I'm just the speakerphone of the hive mind here. And
no, I just mean just the quote specifically. It's great. I want that on a t-shirt.
Yeah, no, it definitely does, because again, the state only has two ways to make money, and it's through taxation and through inflation. And currently, the main way to make money as a state is through inflation. It's just straight out money printing, like they literally make money up out of thin air, again, like I think the number is something like 60% of the US dollars in currently in circulation were printed as a response to the COVID crisis. And, of course, they won't say it out straight. They will call it quantitative easing or QE infinity, or, there's a lot of other financial tricks going on. There are a lot of euphemisms for printing money, but it's all printing money nonetheless. It's making up base money. And so this is what Bitcoin fixes, literally. And it, if the world moves towards a Bitcoin standard, so that more and more people and also businesses choose Bitcoin as their money, you can view Bitcoin as like a foreign currency. Like you live on the internet and you use Bitcoin. It's just like you live in Switzerland, you use the Swiss franc. And if you go somewhere else for shopping, you exchange a little bit. And yeah, like if you go to Turkey as a Swiss citizen for shopping, you exchange it to some, lira fun coupons, just like you go into a casino or what have you, and you just play around with it a little bit and you spend it. And but it's not your base money, and a lot of Bitcoiners are living this already, like Bitcoin is my base money and I see everything else as, something to not take seriously. And I just use it if I have to buy groceries or what have you. And in some places, like in El Salvador, for example, we see now states adopting Bitcoin as well. And you can actually go to the supermarket and pay with Bitcoin. And I expect this to continue because it's just better money, and in the end, the better technology will always win out. That's why we are having this call over the internet now, and we are not writing letters to each other. And that's just that's just how the world works. In the end, the superior technology will win, and Bitcoin is both superior to fiat money and also to gold.
Well, what do you make of the Lightning Network? Do you see that as being the direction that things go, or is there some other like second layer architecture that's being worked on that you would point to instead?
There are some others, but I think the Lightning Network has proven itself, and I think it is the way to go for the foreseeable future. The thing that one has to understand about Bitcoin is that Bitcoin literally is base money. It is very much like we were on the gold standard, but we did not send around gold coins all the time. There were gold certificates and so on. That's how we ended up in this mess in the first place. Like the people started trading the certificates, and then, the smart bankers, they just rehypothecated the gold that they had. So they had like, a couple of gold coins in their vault, but they acted as if they had, like hundreds of bars and no one checked. and so, and that's also what's different now, like Bitcoin is base money, but the Lightning Network is cryptographically linked to Bitcoin. So it is Bitcoin and you're transacting with real Bitcoin, but it is way faster and it's a way to scale, because if you know a little bit about Bitcoin is like this open, transparent ledger of transactions. And so basically what this means is that every transaction that happens in Bitcoin is visible to everyone else. So it's like a broadcast system. If you know anything about like networks, that's how the internet worked, or how networked computing worked in the very early days. And so you have to do things in a smarter way, because if I'm buying a chewing gum at the corner store, like you don't have to broadcast this to the whole world. Like that just doesn't scale, like there's so many transactions going on like every millisecond in the world. It's not even funny. So this will never scale. And so we need this layer of transparency and truth to make such a system, like a digital monetary system, work. And so the way that like everything else, like also the internet, everything scales in layers, so to speak. The current monetary system definitely scales in layers as well. Like that's the reason why your Visa and your MasterCard takes, like weeks to settle. Like you don't have instant settlement with credit cards and so on. And so these are similar ideas, but they work very, very differently on a technological level. And again, the Lightning Network is directly cryptographically linked to Bitcoin. And you can't understand it as like the Visa on top of your, I don't know, your debit account or what have you, like that's not a terrible comparison. And the Lightning Network is already good enough to onboard a lot of people, and again, I mentioned El Salvador a second ago, and most businesses and citizens and most companies in El Salvador that use Bitcoin use the Lightning Network. It's like the standard, the go-to standard there. And we will see what will emerge. Like there are some other candidates, but they are not for end users specifically. They are more in between, like let's call them Bitcoin banks. There are some second layer solutions for that as well. And people are already working on like third layer solutions that build on top of Lightning. And of course, there are some interesting, still more or less theoretical approaches of how you could do it differently as well. But I think, once you have standards that are good enough, so to speak, it's very much like building a wheel, like how many ditches of pi do you need to calculate? It's like you don't have to go to infinity. You don't have to, there is no 100% perfect. Again, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And I think the Bitcoin base layer definitely made the right trade-offs. And that's also why it's absolutely winning, and if you look at historical performance compared to all other shitcoins, like that's why, again, if there's Bitcoin, there's shitcoin. There is no comparison. And the Lightning Network, it might be good enough, in terms of a scaling solution for Bitcoin that can take care of the vast chunks of all commerce of the world. Like it might be good enough because it is a local solution. It's very much like cash. If I hand you a $5 bill, no one else needs to know about it, and no one else needs to be in between this transaction. No one else needs to just know about it, and so on. So those local solutions scale very, very well, of course.
Grandmas around the world have been thankful for that privacy for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, we were losing it quickly, unfortunately. Yeah. The war on cash is a very real war.
I thought they were going to go harder at that at some point during the COVID thing, but it hasn't been that widespread as far as I've seen anyway. Most people still take cash. All it's done is like coax the last few cash only holdouts into getting a card machine. But anyway, I want to thank you for your time, man. I really appreciate it. Do you want to like point people towards your social medias or work you've got, you're doing, or anything you're putting out at the minute?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I'm somewhat of a Twitter addict, so you can find me on Twitter. I think that's the easiest way. They're Gigi, DERGIGI, and my handle .com is also like theirgg.com is also my website, and I put a lot of my writing there. And yeah, if you're interested in Bitcoin, I wrote a little book called 21 Lessons. It's available in, I think, 6 or so languages now in print, and like a dozen or so online. You can read it online for free. The audiobook is also online for free. Just check it out, 21lessons.com. And I'm working on a second book currently, which is called 21 Ways. And I wrote like good chunks of it, and I'm releasing it chapter by chapter on an open license that worked very well for the previous book as well. So if you want to check out, I think I published 2 or 3 chapters already. It's 21waysbook.com. So that's all I got. Awesome.
Well, that's great. I'll put links for everything in the description below. But yeah, man, thanks for the chat. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me, Josh. It was a lot of fun indeed.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the podcast. If you want to leave us a comment, that would be awesome. Please like, share, subscribe, and if you're listening on Apple, please leave us a review. Until next time, thanks for listening.